It certainly is. Look, yesterday we had the Chancellor outlining her vision for growth for this country, because they are a government for growth. It is their #1 priority, despite everything we've seen so far. Are you convinced by what seems to be driving this? I mean, these massive expansion projects, things like Heathrow.
Look, I think the government is right to go for growth because we do need growth to be able to raise the funds to put our public services back on their feet. But Heathrow expansion and other airport expansion is the wrong way to go. All of the government's own figures suggest that the amount of growth you get from it is absolutely tiny, absolutely marginal, and will take years to realise. But it will come at enormous cost, both to the climate and to those people who are living under the flight paths as well. So I think it's the wrong approach.
What do you make of the plans for Europe's Silicon Valley, that corridor between Oxford and Cambridge, that investment in AI and tech?
Well, we Liberal Democrats have long recognised that we are a European and global leader in the science sector, and this particular growth corridor between Oxford and Cambridge could potentially be really, really good. But there are particular MPs who want to have conversations with the government to make sure that the benefits of that really do reach out beyond just the centre of Oxford and Cambridge, that they actually benefit everybody across the line, that where there's new housing, there's infrastructure that comes first or alongside the new development, and it creates jobs right across all of the counties that are going to be involved in it.
Yeah, but in terms of this, I mean, there is a fundamental problem, isn't there? I mean, I know it wasn't their own policy, but the levelling up agenda is something which is important, isn't it? And if everything is being focused so much on the south and the southeast of the country, where does that leave places like the northwest and the northeast?
Well, look, I think all of us want to see everybody in this country prosper from these plans. The fact of the matter is, we Liberal Democrats have supported other things like HS2 with the Northern Powerhouse, and it's important that we see those kind of plans go forward. There certainly were questions put to the government in Parliament yesterday about whether there would be benefits to the north of England and in Scotland as well. And clearly those are questions that the government needs to answer. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on other plans that they bring forward over the coming months.
Rachel Reeves has said that she is absolutely happy to look at joining a tariff-free trading scheme with Europe. It's the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention. What do you make of that? Is that something that you would support? Because obviously it's been criticised for crossing those post-Brexit red lines.
Yes, we would support it, and we actually want the government to be far more ambitious and to work more urgently on this. The fact of the matter is that we have British businesses that are really hamstrung by red tape and reams of paperwork, whether it's garden centres trying to import or export plants, whether it's manufacturing companies trying to make great British products, whether it's British entrepreneurs trying to sell their products into Europe. And the reams of red tape are just really hammering small businesses. So yes, we do want the government to embrace these new trading relationships, and we're calling on the government to renegotiate our relationship with the EU this year and include within that the goal of negotiating a bespoke customs union that works in Britain's interests, and to make sure we get that in place by 2030.
Why would they want to do that, though, without trying to pull us in closer to the EU? Why is it? What interest is it to them to have us closer in that sense?
Well, look, it's a sort of basic rule of international trade that you want to close tradely with your closest neighbours. There's red tape in the way, and the more trade that there is, the benefits can be shared not just for the UK, but also for European countries as well. So I think having a youth mobility scheme so that young people can live and work abroad and have that on a reciprocal basis, having this bespoke customs union that allows British businesses to trade with other businesses in Europe, it's a win-win scenario. That's why we have these various trading relationships all around the world, and we want to see more ambition from this government in fixing that trading relationship and unleash the growth that could come from our small businesses.
OK, Daisy Cooper, we're out of time with you, I'm afraid, but thank you so much for your time this morning.
Yes, we're chock-a-block because the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, joins us now. Good morning to you. Does Daisy Cooper have a point when she says, actually, we need to, if we want to grow the economy, we need to have at least a better working relationship with the EU, and a bespoke deal for a customs union may be the way forward? Get rid of the red tape.
Well, look, we voted in that referendum to leave the European Union, and we are not going to go back on that decision. And I think when you get into discussions around potentially re-entering either the single market or the customs union, then you're taking a step in that direction. Now, that's not the same thing, of course, as saying that we shouldn't be looking at the frictions that there are in our trading relationships with the EU and seeing how those can be eased. And obviously there'll be further negotiations this year around that, and we will play, as a party, a constructive part in that, because we do recognise, of course, that the EU is an extremely important trading partner.
Yeah, but Lord Frost, David Frost, who was your Brexit minister for a time when you were in government, and some of you very, very sort of hard Brexit in many respects. He said to try and say that this sort of deal would be a backdoor to the EU is wrong.
Well, I think you're talking about the PEMS cooperation that's on the table, and that involves non-EU countries as well as the EU, and is about the composition of products that are made in the UK and whether they can count as solely UK or they have to have elements within them that have come from somewhere else and therefore accrue tariffs with the EU, which is rather different, I think, than discussions about the actual customs union itself in the context of the European Union. So I think that's something that, certainly we can have a look at. And as with all these things, however, the devil would be in the detail.
What do you make of Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday? Are you supportive of a third runway at Heathrow?
Yeah, in principle, things like a runway at an extra runway at Heathrow and various other infrastructure projects that she was talking about, absolutely subject to the detail. Where it makes sense for longer term growth, then as a responsible opposition, we will be supportive of that. But I think there's an important point here, which is that what Rachel Reeves was talking about yesterday were very long-term projects. I mean, you mentioned Heathrow, that could be the 2040s, 2050s before anything was completed. And most of these projects, you're looking at the 2030s onwards. None of that does anything to address the fundamental problem that we've got at the moment up and down the country, with businesses laying off employees because this government's come in with this huge jobs tax, which is weighing down on the economy, and a disastrous budget that has killed growth stone dead. And none of the announcements that were made yesterday are going to be leaning into rectifying that situation over the coming years. So really what the government's got to do, and the Chancellor's got to do, is to come back to the Commons on the 26th of March when she'll be giving her spring statement and explain how it is she is going to get those animal spirits in the economy going and get a much more upbeat mood in the country, and to help relieve the pressure that there is on the productive part of the UK economy, all those businesses up and down the land.
It's very difficult to be critical, though, isn't it, Mr. Stride, on the basis that the Conservative Party sort of shredded its reputation for economic competence over the last 14 years, and now as the official opposition, you're not putting forward any policies to say how you do things better.
Look, I've always said that there were certainly mistakes made in the past, and I was very much on the record on that. But look, we left a very good inheritance for this government. We had the fastest growth in the G7. We had near record levels of employment, near record low levels of unemployment. We'd had 13 consecutive months of real wage growth, and we brought inflation down from over 11% due to the Ukraine-Russia war down to exactly 2% on target on the day of the general election. Now, this government has entirely trashed that record and trashed that inheritance, and it's people up and down the country in various ways who are paying the price. In terms of what we should be doing, we were clear in our manifesto. Let's get a grip on welfare. We saved £5 billion from the welfare budget when I was Secretary of State at DWP. We had further plans, clear plans for £12 billion worth of savings, which were in our manifesto. We would have taken very different choices, particularly around tax, had we formed this government. We would not be taxing jobs. You know, when Rachel Reeves sat down yesterday, it was within a short period that Tesco were joining the other major supermarkets and announcing hundreds of job losses. Lloyds Bank, 136 bank branches being closed down on our high streets. That is the world that we live in at the moment. The biggest barrier to growth at the moment is the Chancellor herself. She needs to come to the House of Commons and explain how she is going to address those more immediate issues that the country is facing.
Now, just take you back to infrastructure projects for just a moment, because isn't it hypocritical of you to support infrastructure projects for growth when you had one in HS2 and you scrapped it?
Well, there's a particular decision around HS2, which was, I think, finally a recognition. I think it was ultimately the right one, that there were better ways of investing that money into travel and travel infrastructure across and between cities, particularly up in the north. And of course, it allowed us to fund the £2 bus fare and all sorts of other things that we did at that time. But, you know, there were lots of things that we did when we were in government. We mustn't lose sight of the big successes that we have had. Crossrail, for example, Hinkley Point nuclear, which will be coming on stream in the next few years. We built 2.5 million homes since 2010, a million of those just in the last Parliament alone. So there was an awful lot that we did, but we recognise that there's more to do. We are under new leadership, and in terms of getting these projects moving faster and further addressing planning and some of the barriers to growth that we've had, that is the kind of stuff that I and Kemi and our team will be working on over the coming months and years.
OK, Mel Stride, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Let's talk to former advisor to Boris Johnson, Oscar Reddrop, who's here. What do you make of it, Oscar? I wonder how long the under new management banner can stay up.
Just in general terms, so we had a Lib Dem, we had the Tories, obviously all talking about, you know, the Labour government and Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday. It's just all so rubbish. And like, it's people talking about realities as they want them to be, rather than the realities of the present day. I mean, from Rachel Reeves' perspective, we hear a government just banging on about growth. I mean, growth is the goal, it's not the strategy. There's no strategy towards it. We had a budget that completely, and I completely agree with Mel on this, killed growth stone dead. And yet, instead of talking about the realities that we now face as a country, where their food shops are too expensive, where their bills are going through the roof, where their wages are stagnating, where national insurance rises that have hit businesses means they can't, they can't take on, a lot of people who normally get their first job, they can't take those people on. People being laid off in supermarkets, the list goes on. That's the reality. And what we had yesterday was a imagined make-believe fairy tale world, you know, in 2050, 40, whatever, where we may or may not get a third runway. You know, when we look at things, you were right to point out, HS2 probably won't happen because infrastructure in this country is a complete mess in terms of how we get things done. That's no political party's fault. So I just feel like I'm living in some make-believe world that, that on the ground has no real relevance. I mean, this is a bit ranty, isn't it, for a but I actually feel quite passionate about this. And just lastly on that, you know, and you again were right to point this out, you know, it was just so kind of south-east, kind of southern England focused yesterday. And, you know, people scoffed at levelling up and Boris Johnson. But you know what, actually, what did that mean? That meant, that was something he cared about and that government cared about a lot, and that meant train stations in Darlington, it meant bus routes in Middlesbrough, and now we're just hearing about, Starmer did his AI thing the other week, and it's, the Oxbridge kind of, growth tunnel, whatever the hell it's called, and I just find it all quite depressing. and actually, and for your viewers, who are sat there now ready to go to work and do a hard day's work, they'll look at yesterday and go, how does any of this improve my situation in the coming weeks, months, or, to be frank, years?
What do you think they'll make of the 180 in terms of tone from the Chancellor as well? Because we seem to have gone from doom and gloom to her saying she's so excited for the future and so excited for Britain.
It doesn't.
The public will believe her.
Yeah, no, it doesn't ring true. And there was on the supply side reforms yesterday. In of itself, there was some really good, solid stuff from Rachel Reeves yesterday. So, in that sense, green light, go for it, good stuff. But it was an audition for her to keep her own job in many ways. That's how it read to me. She's been under intense pressure, And that kind of tonal shift of this is the worst economic situation the Tories have left since, you know, the Second World War, to everything's rosy, everything's brilliant, growth, growth, growth. You can see why the people just feel disorientated, you know, like members of the public when they see politics on those terms and tonal shifts like that. It doesn't add up, it doesn't make sense, and yeah, I just think it was all a bit of a waste of time yesterday.
OK.
I'm not normally ranty, that's not normally, but
Nothing wrong with a rant every now and then.